You're listening to the Sass podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how?
Hello. Oh my, I am so excited for this one. I'm joined today by Jessi Jean. You know her, you love her from Instagram, from her podcast. She is a self-proclaimed simple girl who grew up in a tiny cabin in Colorado. She turned her decade-long struggle with food and body into her life's work and mission. Now she helps women all over the world end the fight with food and find confidence in their skin so they can live in complete freedom. Jessi studied to become a mind-body eating coach, partnered up with a licensed professional counselor, and created the Food Freedom online program. She is also the host of the Dear Body podcast and has a social media following of over 170,000. All right, so this is definitely one of those intersessions, part interview, part coaching session. Jessi shares some of her story and how she overcame her struggles with food and body image. We talk about the levels and pillars, if you will, of healing, the impact of our visual diet on our physical and mental health, hint, hint, social media, and the idea of mental pivoting. Jessi shares her take on willpower, attention-seeking in adults, and protecting our peace. And really, so much more. It's such a good episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. Here she is. Hey, Jessi. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why don't you start a little bit about your story and what led you to do the work you're doing today?
Yes. So I struggled with my relationship with food and my body for over a decade. And at one point in my journey, I thought, this is going to be the thorn in my side that I probably deal with the rest of my life. And at that point, when I was thinking that, it was incredibly defeating. That thought was incredibly heavy. And I remember feeling so much shame and so much guilt and so much fear that this was going to be the way that I live my life, that it was going to be constantly fighting food, constantly fighting my body, not feeling good enough in my body, always feeling this insecurity and the shame around how I looked. And I remember when I was in college, I was sitting on my dorm room bed and I was thinking to myself, I cannot live the rest of my life like this. I cannot imagine going into one day, hopefully being married, which I am now, going into one day, hopefully having children and struggling with this. It was my biggest, deepest, darkest secret. And I remember thinking, life either isn't worth, it was a pretty dark thought. It was life either isn't worth living or it is worth living. And I have to believe that I can get over this. And I've got to do everything in my power to at least try. And it was in that moment that I decided that I had to tell somebody. And I had been hearing that inside my spirit for years, that the first step was to tell somebody. And I was praying and praying and praying and praying. And I just kept getting this tiny voice inside that was like, you've got to tell somebody, you've got to tell somebody. And I had sworn on my life that I would never tell a soul that I was struggling. And I kept hearing that voice. And I remember saying, God, I will do anything except tell somebody that I'm struggling with this. And that was the only thing that kept coming through. And so eventually, my freshman year of college, that's when I cracked and I told my best friend at the time what I was going through. And it was just like word vomit all over her. I kind of blacked out. I don't even remember really what I said. I just gave it to her, everything that I was going through, everything I was dealing with. And her response was so graceful. She really didn't know what it was like to struggle with food in her body. She always had a very neutral relationship with those things. But she said, I don't know what that's like, but we're going to get through it.
Mm.
And that's
Pretty
really
profound
what
for a college student.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really, I think, the moment that I started to take notable steps forward in my healing journey, but it continued to be a really long road from there. I went down all these different little places that were incredibly toxic in my pursuit of trying to heal until I finally found my way out of that mental hellhole. And when I did, that's when I felt like I had this moral obligation to support women who are also going through it. So I went back and got additional education, and got my certification so that I could be able to do this work, and have been doing it, been working with women for the last it'll be 5 years in the spring. Working with them in the journey of conquering binge and emotional overeating and body image challenges. So it's been quite a journey, but one that I feel like is so important and so necessary. And so many people are struggling and they're caught in this shame spiral and they're caught in the fear, and there is a way out. And that's a message that I hope to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I will go back, but the first thought that is coming to me is, are you now doing this work? Are you triggered by talking about this all the time and talking to other women who are struggling? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, fortunately, there was years after I found my healing that I felt called to do this work, but I felt also, to be totally frank, kind of repulsed by it. I wanted nothing to do with being in this world because I was so glad to be out of it and out of my own mental hellhole. So, there was many years that I felt like I was supposed to come and do this type of work, and it just I couldn't bring myself to do it. And I think probably some of that as I was still on my healing journey unknowingly. But at this point, no, nothing about talking about this, nothing with food triggers me. I will have days where I notice, my latest thing is I'm noticing my smile lines when when I'm not smiling, they're still ingrained in my face. And I'm like, oh, this is what aging is all about, and that's a little triggering. I'm like, dang, like our bodies are constantly changing. So there are certainly days where I'm not loving my body. But because I really, really do believe I am so much more than my body, I'm really able to dismiss it and release it and move on. And so nothing with food and very little with body image triggers me. And I think that's really important if you're going to support people who are healing. I know a lot of people who you've got to be in a place where you're healed to support other people on that journey.
Yeah. What was that shift like? Like, when did you realize, okay, I'm okay to do this now, or that you even wanted to do this?
When it all felt a lot lighter, I used to think about this world as a very dark and scary world, because it was very dark for me when I was in it. But I think it was at the point where I felt like my light was brighter than the darkness. And so I could go into the darkness and not be engulfed by it. I knew that my light could, it was bright enough that I just had this sense that, I'm going to be able to go into this and not get sucked into it. And it was, I think it was at the point where, nothing with food was triggering at all. I wasn't counting macros or calories. I was eating intuitively, listening to my body. my relationship with food was easy. It was effortless. My relationship with my body was, super peaceful. I knew at that point that there was no going back into the world of disordered eating and body image insecurities. It was just something that I could feel in my spirit. I had turned the page.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you use the word healed to say like, and I don't mean to nitpick your words. I just find it interesting because so many that I've encountered, whether it's social media accounts or coaching programs or whatever, sort of have the rhetoric that we're not ever fully healed. Like it's always a journey. It's always a process. And I wonder what your take on that is.
Yeah. I do have some strong opinions about that.
Okay.
I do think healing from this, I think we are always developing. I think we're always growing. I think we're always evolving. I think mental health is a lifelong journey that, needs our support, just like our physical health needs our support our entire life. So does our mental health. But I do believe that there is full healing from these struggles with food and body image.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is I do think along the journey, there are levels to freedom and ease in your relationship with food that you will achieve. And for me, at one point, going from counting calories or being on a meal plan to understanding flexible dieting and having this idea that I could eat whatever foods I want as long as they fit within my macros, that was a step towards greater freedom. Until it wasn't, until I was exhausted from weighing, tracking, and measuring every gram of protein, carb, and fat. But it was a step. It was a step closer to freedom in my journey than, having a meal plan that I could only have 20 different foods on. So there's levels to this and there's layers to healing. But I think that getting to this point where you're no longer triggered into binge and emotional overeating is entirely possible. And like I said, I still have days where I don't love the way that I look or, like our bodies are always changing. So I think that process it's a dynamic one, most certainly. But I really do think we can get to this point where we really have turned the page on our struggles with food and body image. And do I think there are people who will go through this process, they'll find healing, and then they'll be around some incredibly toxic people and they'll slip back into diet culture's ways or back into their old behaviors? Absolutely. Just like there's individuals who struggle with alcoholism and they can be sober and then they can go back into situations and start drinking again. Yeah, I think that's also possible. But I do think that there is, because I'm living it, there is a place where you can get where it's not, there's nothing in me. I used to simultaneously hate that I was binge and emotionally overeating, but I would get high off of it. I liked it. And if anybody listening to this podcast struggles, that you simultaneously hate that you're doing it, but you like it. Like you get high off of it. I call it the binge or emotional overeating high. There's a sense of euphoria. There is nothing inside of my body that craves that anymore at all. And I feel like that's healing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I like that. I like that answer. That's interesting. And because I like, I struggle with gray area. And meanwhile, I have a podcast about mental health, which is all gray area. But
totally.
With this, like I so crave like a finish line, and I think mostly because I feel like wherever that finish line is, like I just want the relief of getting this out of the way. Like it's it's in my way.
Yeah.
Because I wake up and think about it. And I was saying this, I think, to someone last week, or maybe it was my therapist. I don't know, where it's like with so many aspects of my life that I'm constantly working on, there is an ability to put it aside.
Sure.
But eating and your body, like you're in it 24/7 and you need to do it every day.
Yeah. Let me tell you what stands in the way. And this is the thing that my team and I talk about all the time. What stands in the way from this, quote unquote finish line, which again, I really do believe in this, like healing is 100% possible. But I also, I think two things can be true. I think that
Mhm.
it can be 100% possible and it's really gray,
Yeah.
because it looks different for a lot of people. But the thing that keeps people from that feeling of, I have arrived in this really peaceful place, the thing that keeps people that just like, it's in my head, I see it as this hand that's like holding the back of your shirt and you're like, come on, like let go. And you're trying to run and it's just like pulling you back.
Yeah.
It's the body image struggles.
Yeah.
Because if we can make peace in our body, our relationship with food becomes so much easier, because our relationship with food is often driven by this fear around not being good enough in our bodies. And that is really hard in a world that is obsessed with this unrealistic thin ideal, and
Mhm.
that we're constantly being bombarded with these images from social media. And
Mhm.
it's hard. I spend a lot of time on social media as, a business owner, having to market my services. And, it's really hard. I see things all the time come across my feed where I'm like, man, yeah, like, okay, lip filler is all the rage. Like maybe that's what I should go and get. And, it's just like all these different things that we constantly see. And the reality is, this is a reality. What our visual diet, what we see on a day-to-day basis is what is creating what's normal in our brain. And what we see on social media is such a small margin of reality,
Mhm.
and yet it has so much power over us because we spend so much time consuming it. But
Mhm.
I always tell my clients, I'm like, look, I have a list of about 60 different creators and influencers. And I'm like, if you want to have a radical challenge, social or body image challenge, go and either create a Finsta, fake Instagram, and just get off your other one for a while and only follow. And it's same with TikTok, and only follow these like 60-ish people. The algorithm will start sending you more accounts that are like it, and see what that does to your perception of reality. If you do that over the next 30 days and don't look at your other social media feed, it will
Mhm.
change the way you see yourself and your own body.
Yeah.
But it's hard. I mean, we live in this world that is obsessed with the way that we look, and the ideal is constantly changing.
Yeah.
So we're never good enough. We never hit the mark.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea because I think yeah, I mean social media it's a thing. But what I'm thinking of is that I often feel like I'm having progress like in my own little world here, and then I go have an experience out in the world,
Sure.
which is unavoidable,
Yeah.
but it's like another test. Another test.
Yes. Yeah. But
uh,
that's when you've got to go. I always tell my clients, you will experience the peace and the feeling of progress in the environment you spend the most amount of time in and feel most comfortable in first. And then you
mm,
are going to go out in the world and you're going to go on this trip that you do maybe once every 6 months or once a
mhm,
year, or you're going to go be around coworkers, or you're going to go have an experience, and it's going to trigger something. But the mindset that you've taken, 10 steps back is entirely inaccurate. You're just going into a new environment, and it's challenging you to up level your own self-perception in a number of different ways. I am a whole lot more confident around my inner circle than when I get in front of a people I don't know. I'm like,
mhm,
whoa, all these feelings of like all this different energy comes in when I'm not in my safe spaces.
mhm,
And that's normal. That's human.
mhm, mhm. All right. So I want to ask you about something I heard you talk about on Erin Washington's podcast, Squats and Margaritas. I used to work with her a long time ago. And so I
Awesome.
check into her show, and it was something that really resonated with me. Your thoughts on willpower.
Mm,
Can you talk a
yeah,
little bit about that?
sure. Yeah.
Mm,
Willpower and, discipline are, first, I want to say that they are beautiful things. It's wonderful to be able to draw upon willpower and discipline, but it is a finite resource, not intended for everyday use.
mhm,
It is something that we draw upon when we need it. It's something that we draw upon And this gets a little gray, and people throw around these terms a lot. And I think that it's important to talk about this in a nuanced way. Willpower and discipline, when it relates to trying to control food, is like trying to use willpower and discipline to regulate going to the bathroom. Like that makes no sense. It sounds really, really silly.
Mhm.
Our body can handle regulating and is intended and is designed to regulate our hunger, our fullness, our satiety. But because we've gotten so wrapped up in not feeling good about ourselves, that's impacted the way we're trying to do foods. We try and control food. And then ironically, foods ends up controlling us.
Mm.
And so it's an inappropriate or a misuse of willpower and discipline to apply it to something like trying to control food.
Mm.
If we can learn how to listen to our hunger, fullness, and satiety cues and trust those, we will move into an easier relationship with food. But I want to be very real. If you've tried to just quote unquote listen to your body and listen to your hunger cues and stop when you're full, you're probably, if you've tried that and it didn't work for you, you're listening to this and you're like, sounds nice, but actually try it.
Mhm.
You have to go through what I call the messy middle of healing to get to this place where you can be in this easy, effortless relationship with food. Because if you haven't done that and you've been controlling food for a really long time, it is like what you're doing. I use this analogy with my clients. Imagine your internal world is like a highly pressurized soda bottle, and the lid is screwed on tight. And every time you diet, every time you think a judgmental or shameful thought about yourself or your body, or you speak ill about your body, or, you're in these cycles of dieting and binging, it's like shaking this soda bottle and it's just getting more and more pressurized. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to have a free weekend, or I'm going to have a cheat day, or I'm going to try and listen to my body. And it's like you unscrew that bottle cap and the pressure just comes out.
Mhm.
And so it's messy, and you're eating in quantities that you're like, there's no way this is healthy. There's no way this is balanced. But if you learn to leave the cap off, the pressure eventually settles. And so when it comes to willpower and discipline, it really is something that should be, we have to utilize discipline in our self-care practices because it takes discipline to care for ourselves. But it's certainly, it's something that we should draw upon in emergency situations. Instead, we should learn how to put our success on autopilot by creating habits out of our success that create these upward spirals instead of these kind of downward spirals that a lot of us get into.
Mhm. Mhm. I thank you. And I asked about willpower mainly because just yesterday, I thought the take was interesting, and one I hadn't heard before. When I heard you talk about it with Erin.
Yeah.
But just yesterday, I was in therapy and I was telling my therapist, things are feeling hard again. Like
Mm,
I had gotten to a point where I was like super focused on all this and like
yeah.
trying to reset the thoughts and catch the thoughts and do the things. And I definitely now I very much resonate with messy middle. Um, but as she was asking me we're considering doing some EMDR for
Cool.
this. And one of the things that she said, she's like, before we do that though, we have to really get at the root of what we're looking for. Like, what is it? And she just kind of asked me to talk about, I can't even remember the prompt, but ultimately, as I just started sharing stories of like earliest memories of food, body, all the things. I know
Yeah.
you are a gymnast. I was a gymnast, having a mom who was on and off diets, even if it was for health, quote unquote. Um, the word we came to was willpower, was me constantly feeling like it is a matter of willpower and not having enough of it. Like
Mm,
seeing a bread basket on a table and having the willpower to not eat
mm,
it, or
yeah.
watching my friends in high school before prom eat no carbs and do the things and looking at them going, I just don't have enough willpower to do that.
Mm, mhm.
And And it's such, yeah, I don't know. It's something that's just really like, I think drilled in us by diet culture and
Yeah.
everything, that like, we are the problem.
Yeah.
We're not working hard enough. We're not
Right.
doing what we need to do. And I do it to myself now when I set the alarm to get up early and work out and I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, well, you just didn't have the willpower. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
ah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I like, this is exactly it. The mess of it is that I'm seeing all of this,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm still berating myself over it.
Totally. It's, so much of the reason we are the way we are is because of researchers believe that true behavior change is a product of belief change.
Mm.
So kind of the cascade of, or the domino effect that leads to why we do the things we do goes, we believe certain things, we see the world, we see ourselves through a certain lens. So we have our belief system, and that informs the thoughts that we have, which are just the sentences that run through our head, which cause us to feel certain emotions. And those emotions, the reason we do most of the things we do is because we feel a certain way.
Mhm.
And that leads to, the results of our life. And so the inner dialogue that you're having around this is limiting, and
Mhm.
it's informing the behavior.
Yeah,
And it's
totally is.
hard. It's
Oh,
so
totally.
freaking hard to uproot beliefs that have been they have roots so deep. And part of this is starting to really understand this belief does not serve me. And
Mhm.
it is like a broken record in my brain, and I have to
Mhm.
start paying attention to every single time it comes up. And I have to use a tool of mental pivoting, which goes, I recognize I have the self-awareness that I'm thinking that damn thought again, and I've
Mhm.
got to pivot. I've got to take my focus and I've got to go, what is a more empowering thought? What is a more empowering? And you have to practice that over and over and over again. And it's like, this is the process of carving out new neural pathways in the brain. And I always remind people, it takes an annoying amount of repetition.
Mhm.
So don't get discouraged,
Mhm.
but it can be life-changing when that narrative inside your head changes.
Yeah. Would you say, well, what do you think about this? Because I often feel like when I am in a practice of doing that, of pivoting, I often feel like I have the sensation of faking it before I make it. Like, I
Mhm.
often feel like I don't know that I fully believe this, but I know that this is what I need to be telling myself.
Yeah. You've got to look for evidence as to why this is true,
Mm.
why this is and so that's why things like role models and people who are on this journey, but maybe, 5 steps ahead of you is really important. Sometimes it's hard when you're like, okay, great. Like Jessi's 5 year, Jessi's been free of this struggle for 5, 8, 10 years, clients looking at me. But what's so encouraging to them is somebody who's, gone through my program just 4 months ago. And they're like, okay, I can
Mhm.
see the light a little bit ahead of me.
Mhm.
So, our brain is constantly looking for evidence as to why what we believe is true. And our brain's reticular activating system goes to work to affirm the beliefs that we have, and multiple realities can be true.
Mhm.
And so whatever we're focused on, we will see that in the world. And so really seeking out evidence as to why it's true, or people who are walking it or living it, and I always tell my clients, when you're pivoting to a different thought, if everything in your body is resisting, because it's like, yeah, this is not true. I don't even know if I believe this. You've got to have an affirmation or a thought that's maybe, just a 10-degree difference, not
Mhm.
180, because
Mhm.
our spirit's like, this is a BS detector. I feel it,
Yeah. Yeah. I interviewed Tara Brunet, and she talks about her course is manifesting dream body. And
Mhm.
it is like she says, you can't fake your frequency. And what I have learned about myself over just the last month or so of really doing more reflection on this is that I was trying to skip over acceptance. was just trying to be like, hey, I love this. Everything's great. I feel awesome. And my body was like, no, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other thing, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I want to share with you mine. And then if you could speak on maybe some other common ones that you hear from your clients, but the fear piece, I think, is so significant and is such a block. And I think, and this is also going to touch on weight and thinness and the whole thing. But my fear, at least one that I can identify, is that if I accept where I am and who I am, that I will never lose weight. And although I want to say that losing weight is not the be all end all, I am not comfortable where I am. Like I'm, 2.5, almost 3 years postpartum with my second. And my body just still feels like an alien body. It's like, who is this? This is not me. I don't feel comfortable. I want to even feel, whether it's I don't even equate it to a number anymore. That part I have worked through, but I just know that I don't know. Maybe I don't know it. I just believe that I'm not my most authentic self in this body at this weight. And so I'm curious, that's a huge loaded question, but thoughts on weight, and also thoughts on other maybe common fears, or thoughts on my fear, wherever you want to go with that.
Yeah, totally. So first off, fear is the only way to move through fear is to face it head on. And so many of us are halted by fear, and we're waiting to feel something different to get us to take action that opens the next door and leads us to the next place. But when it comes to moving through, say, a fear of our body image and gaining confidence, which I always say, if the goal is, well, first let's get to the component of the fear of accepting yourself, keeping you in the place that you're at, which you're not happy with. First of all, acceptance doesn't equate to I like this or I want to stay here. Acceptance goes,
get that.
This is my reality right now, and I'm going to be a fully integrated human right now. When we refuse to accept our reality, it's like our bodies and our brains are detached, and we lose so much power in being able to make a change, because it's as if we're dissociated. So I can go, yes, I accept that this is my present reality, and I also don't like it, but I accept that this is where I'm at. And I think this is the misunderstanding with acceptance. It's just an alignment with reality. It's a coming together of mind and body, and that gives us our power back. And so when it comes to leaning into the fear, this is definitely a multifaceted, and this is something so many of my clients navigate. When it comes to leaning into this, think about this. I always say, you're allowed to have weight loss goals. You're allowed to have aesthetic goals. You are allowed to have these things, but how about you tackle your desire to maybe build more confidence and to feel better about yourself from a multitude of angles? Because if we boil it down to the only way I'm going to feel better about myself and the only way I'm going to build confidence is if I lose weight, we're really shortchanging ourselves. And actually, we're not even allowing ourselves to access those very things, because have you ever lost weight, not felt good enough, and then you gained weight, and then you looked back at pictures and you're like, why the heck did I not feel good enough then?
Only 1,000 times,
Like how many of us have been there? So many of us.
Yeah.
So instead, if you look at it and you go, if you study self-esteem and you study the literature around confidence building, it's really just a set of skills and a set of different pillars that we have to practice. And so if you look at that and you go, okay, and when we have more confidence and more self-esteem, we naturally take better care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's like like what comes first?
Yeah.
Well, you gotta start practicing it. We don't wait to allow ourselves to feel self-esteem and confidence from when our body changes, because then we're just stuck in this downward spiral. So if you are unhappy in your body, and my clients will always say, well, I don't know if I want to get over the fear, for example, of weight gain. I don't know if I want to get over that fear. And what I say is hanging on to a fear of weight gain is not keeping you thin. It's actually sabotaging you.
Right.
So if you want to work on building confidence, which is going to bleed into you naturally taking better care of your body without having to exude so much willpower to do it,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to start practicing it and lean into the very thing that you're afraid of. Oh, you're afraid of, in the summer wearing shorts and a tank top because you're afraid of people looking at your legs and your arms. Well, what if you just tried it? What if you leaned into the very thing that you're afraid of and see that the world doesn't come crashing down around you? When we lean into these things that we're afraid of, we break down this fear. Action is the only thing that breaks down fear. Inaction perpetuates these fear cycles. And so we get caught in these downward loops. And my message is, how do we first stop the downward spiral? And then how do we start creating an upward momentum, upward spiral? So when it comes to the weight component, I also tell my clients, if from the research around body image, if our primary focus is on weight loss and aesthetics, it is associated in the research with weight gain.
Yeah.
So if we can
like why? Like, who made it this way?
Yeah. I know. It's maddening. It's maddening.
So infuriating.
So maddening. So
Yeah.
I always say, broaden what you're focusing on. So, okay, you want to lose weight? I always encourage my clients to keep asking, but why? What is it? What else do I want? Because if we just say we want to lose weight or we want to change our body, again, we're not looking at the depths of what it is we want. And we're allowed to have aesthetic goals, but why do we have them?
Mm-hmm.
What do we want? Do we want to fit in? Do we want to feel attractive? Do we want to feel desirable? Are we wanting to get more into, feeling our feminine energy? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Why? And then can we look at that and can we start tackling what we uncover from like I said, a multitude of angles?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of associations with looking a certain way, and I know that just because I am lived in my body and head for 33 years,
Mm-hmm.
but I know it now when I see a photo of myself and the first thing I think of is she looks sad.
Mm.
And I feel like it's because I genuinely am on the inside, but also because I associate weight gain, especially after having kids, as the whole quote unquote letting myself go. And I totally hear you when you say, when you feel good about yourself, you're more inclined to take care of yourself. And I'm, yeah, like I have a 4.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and I feel the difference when everybody has slept through the night. I feel the difference with what choices I make the next day versus when nobody slept through the night and I'm pushing through. And I mean, that's a whole other thing that we glamorize of, like, how many coffees have you had today? It's like, everybody laughs at that, but like, it feels horrible. It feels disgusting. And then I eat like not as well, and then I don't want to move because this is a whole spiral. So yes, I feel that.
Yeah, it's understandable, and then you put it into practice, and it's hard.
Yeah, when you this and like, so let's just say
I am in the messy middle. And I
Mhm.
think that feels good to me. Like well, I don't know about good, but I hear that and I go, yeah. In your experience, is there a time frame of which someone could be in the messy middle?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I
I
told you
wish.
this was going to be a coaching session, Jessi.
I wish. I wish I could go, okay, girl, you've got
You can,
approximately another 8.5 months. I feel that.
please.
Here's
All right,
here's
you
how
don't
to
have to answer
I
that. I know it
wish.
was like totally like me just like hoping.
Yeah. Here's how to expedite it. I'll tell you.
Okay.
To get out of the messy middle,
Yeah.
you have got to, and I will drive this home with my clients, with people who are struggling that I love. I'm like, you have got to saturate yourself with people who are on this journey or ahead of you in this journey.
Okay.
And that's why why I come back to this whole social media thing. It's because our digital world is saturated in not that, not that,
Yeah.
because you know what? These algorithms are so smart. You stop for 5 seconds longer when a picture of that,
Yeah.
fitness influencer comes up on your feed and the algorithm goes, oh, she likes that. Let's give her more of that. And so you're just saturated in this content that is making you feel not good enough. And so the discipline that needs to be applied is in what you are visually intaking with your diet, what you're listening to, what you're watching on TV, who you are surrounding yourself by, because that is creating what's happening in your internal world. And so if you can go on this journey of peeling yourself out of these places that are causing you to feel like you don't measure up and start showing yourself that there are different communities, there are people who value different things. There are people who are in all different body shapes and sizes, who are incredibly confident, living successful lives, taking great care of themselves. Like, it will change how you feel about yourself. And it is a process. It's a process of, I always tell my clients, when you think about healing and you hear that it's hard, this is hard. This is really hard. And I say, are you willing to saturate yourself in content and people who, and create boundaries, which can be a little lonely, but create these boundaries to protect your peace and allow you to grow, because so many of us are being choked out by what's all around us on our phones and in our real lives. It'll change your reality faster than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And my only thought that came to mind after that is that I can think of people in my life that make me feel a certain way. And it's funny because as you're talking, I'm thinking, maybe I really need to lean into that and more intentionally step back from those relationships. And my thought about it is that, you know, in this case, I don't know that it matters, but I don't think it's actually anything that those people are doing or saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's how it's my perception of them.
Totally.
And what they think and what they believe and what they are making me feel.
Right.
And that, I take comfort in that, because it's in the sense that I don't believe I'm surrounding myself with people who are intentionally hurting me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also a little bit painful, because I can imagine how painful it would be to that person or those people for me to say, you know what, I need to step back, or just to naturally do it, because I know that they're not doing it on purpose. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Totally. And I think that's such beautiful self-awareness, because you're not pointing the finger. You're going, something in my nervous system is activated in these people. And maybe it's just, maybe it's the size of their body. Maybe it's their relationship. Maybe it's their financial status, whatever, things. And when our nervous system is activated, it doesn't mean that somebody's wrong. It just means that we don't feel rest around them for whatever reason at this point in our own journey. And if we can spend more time in places where our nervous system relaxes, it's going to regulate itself better.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be about and a lot of times boundaries aren't about the other person.
Right.
It's about putting ourselves in environments that allow us to thrive.
Yeah. I've heard the phrase before, protect your peace, or, when I ask someone like, how did you make this transformation? And they're like, I really prioritize protecting my peace. And I think maybe what the next part of that sentence is that I don't ask or I don't often hear is that can be so uncomfortable. Like,
Yes.
it's not, when we hear peace, we associate peace with namaste and butterflies and peaceful candles and like loveliness, but
Right.
it's actually not. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
like
No.
the process of doing it
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah, it's
it's heavy.
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
It
it's
is heavy
uncomfortable.
for
Yeah.
sure. I've been kind of going through it in my own way, with some parts of my community. And yeah, for me, it's looked like, no, I'm not available.
Hmm.
I'm actually busy.
Hmm.
Thanks so much for the invite. That's not going to work for me.
Hmm.
Have a great time though.
Hmm.
And it's uncomfortable, especially given, the history or the frequency of time
Mm.
spent, and, and then people feel that, right? And they're like,
Yes.
what's going on? And, it's me going, no, my nervous system feels better with distance. And, um, these behaviors or these ways of thinking don't align with where I'm trying to go.
Mm.
And it's not that I don't love or value these people, but it's just, I really do believe that we become what we are surrounded by, and it's just not what I want to align with.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's dynamic because I love these people, but it's just not what elevates me to where I'm trying to go.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, given all of that, and given the community and the
Mhm.
platform that you've built on social media,
Mm.
what is the evolution of that looked like for you? Was it like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm gonna be this person on social media that has over 100,000 followers, or like, how did that happen, and how do you feel about it?
Mm. Yeah, my relationship with social media has been really constantly evolving. Um Yeah, at first it was just, I showed up and I was on Instagram in right when it came out in like 2012, 13. And I just started sharing, and I was still deep in my eating disorder at this point, but sharing my workouts and nutrition stuff. And it kind of grew from there. And then it evolved as I naturally evolved over the years. And it's something that I don't really have a huge attachment to. I know there's so many people who are like, oh, I have to try and take a break. I'm kind of on this side of things where I'm like, I have to get on there. I have to connect,
Yeah.
because I found so much peace off of social media, but I
Hmm.
do love getting to connect with such incredible people and, meet different people from all across the world online. So I do love that aspect of it. But yeah, it's evolved as I've evolved, and I continue to, just try and align with where I'm at, and, to really communicate that, it is my ever changing thoughts,
Hmm.
and ideas about how to live an incredible life. And that's always changing, and I'm always growing. And so the messages I put out are always evolving as well. But it is so beautiful to get to connect with people over the years who are also changing and allow me to change. And I just give myself, this is something that's been really powerful, is I give myself, permission to reinvent myself as much as I want.
Hmm.
And I think we all should, because we're
Yeah.
all constantly changing. So yeah, it's been a journey for sure, social media.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I mean is certainly tied to social media, and I've also think you have an interesting take on this, that the aspect of attention seeking in
Mm.
adulthood,
Mm.
where does that play a role for you in maybe how you got on social media or how you interact with it now?
Yeah, we are, I always say that, attention is a really important thing. We all need it. And we know that as children, and we ask for it unapologetically. Mommy, daddy, look at me, watch me do this. Look at what I made you. Like we ask for it as a child. And then somewhere between being a child and adolescent and then becoming an adult, we are shamed. We believe there's so much shame for wanting attention, but it's a fundamental human need to have attention and acknowledgement. And part of diet culture is that it seems to be the only acceptable form of attention.
Yeah.
Is like, oh, you've lost weight. Congratulations. Or I'm on a weight loss journey. Congratulations. So we get even more addicted to it because we're getting this fundamental human need met by this one thing. And every other way we ask for or seek attention is shamed. But yeah, for sure. When I first got on social media, Instagram was just like a photo app with some filters or, it was really weird. And so it's just like, okay, I guess this is what we do. But yeah, there's been so many times over the years where it's definitely been an attention seeking thing to feel something. And, I would say my relationship with social media right now is, it seems to me more like a creative art project.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, I want to put my art or my thoughts into the world and I want to see how those resonate and seek attention, most certainly, see how those resonate. And I want to feel a connection with a community who resonates with my art or my messages. But yeah, attention seeking is not a bad thing at all. We need it. And if we asked for it and if we sought it and we felt comfortable doing that, I think we would all feel a lot more fulfilled because we all need it.
Yeah.
But we don't know how to do that.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about that before and I've read it on your posts and things and it really resonated because, I think especially those of us that are creating content and I'm by no means with a audience that you have, but it's like, I feel like there is this perception from those watching that they want us to put ourselves out there, but then will
make it look
shame
like
us.
you don't care, right?
Right.
Make it look like you're not trying.
Exactly. It's like, I don't get it. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
If you're a person that is constantly creating content, and I know that you've received some comments on this, like when you are having a low point, when you are crying, when you are this or that, like it doesn't, if you stop and document it, that's just because that's your brain doing, it's not your brain doing its job, but it's your job. It's your job to show it all. And I don't know, to like, for all the claims out there that social media is not real and this and that and all the hate about it. And then when someone does show something real, it's like, oh my God, how could you do that? It's like, dude, what do you want? Like, it's like infuriating.
Yeah. And it's because people don't know, they don't know what's going on in their own head. And yeah, they want it and then they don't want it. And then they want you to make it look effortless. And then they want you to show them everything. And then you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, it kind of feels like, but that's why, I always try and articulate. I think the Brene Brown says, our world, the size of our world depends on the size of our language. And our language is what opens us up. So the more language we have, the better we're able to articulate what we're feeling, what we're thinking, the more our world really does expand. And so when I get these comments, I really try and not personalize anything. I go, yeah, I can see your point and I can see how this is triggering for you. And, you put out something where maybe you're not happy-go-lucky and people are like, wow, why would you put that on social media? Da, 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 da. And you're like, I can see how that activates people who were never given a space to feel safe, to show anything but positive emotions. So then I always try and use it as a teaching opportunity, and it's some receive it and some don't. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's totally okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jessi, we have your podcast that we can go to for additional information. And is your program, the 4-month program, is that open enrollment anytime?
As of right now, it is. Yep.
Okay.
Open enrollment anytime. That might change in the future, but that's how it is right now.
Okay.
Mhm.
And is there anything in particular that you would want listeners to know about the program that they
Mm.
wouldn't maybe get from your website?
Mm. Yeah, I always tell people that, there are so many different resources out there, and to not ever feel any pressure. I will market my program relentlessly because I believe in it and I know the world needs it.
Mhm.
But you should never feel any pressure in terms of where you go to find healing.
Mm.
And there's so many different resources out there. And if you've tried a resource or a therapist or a coach or a program and it hasn't worked to heal your relationship with food or get you to the next level, instead of internalizing that or feeling shame or feeling guilt for that, maybe just have the mindset that perhaps I didn't get the tools or the approach or the support that was necessary for where I'm at right now, because healing is possible. It's just a matter of continuing to knock and continuing to seek, because the answers are out there. So don't give up in your journey of seeking help and seeking support.
Mhm. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know. I'm sure someone else needed to hear it, but I needed to hear it because I
Mhm.
feel like I'm just always, oh, could be helpful, grab it. This could be helpful, grab it. And I started to feel like, am I just like
Mm,
grabbing and grabbing and grabbing for the sake of grabbing rather
mm,
than
mhm.
progressing?
Yeah, I know. I know. Sometimes it's, the exact same message can be delivered by somebody different by a
Yeah.
different person differently. And you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
my therapist, when my husband and I go to couples counseling, and I'll tell my therapist something that I'm trying to tell my husband. And then he tells my husband, and he literally says the exact same thing. And my husband's like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I'm like, I am going to tackle, I've been saying it
Yeah,
just like that, but
I
sometimes it's
know.
just a different person saying it in a different way.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
So, all right, Jessi, thank you so, so much for your time. You are
Mhm.
incredible. I just really appreciate
Mhm.
everything you do and everything you put out there. So, thank you again for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so I clearly got a lot out of this. I hope you did too. I felt like everything she said was a quote. And with that in mind, I am finding it completely ridiculous trying to narrow it down and pinpoint just a few points to drive home as I usually do. But I did come up with this that I'd like to share. I re listened to and edited this conversation before heading out to a family wedding for the weekend. A wedding in which I felt like I'd be a little bit on display. I was a co matron of honor. My kids were in the wedding. So I just felt like a lot of people would be looking at me. I didn't feel supremely comfortable in my dress. I did have a fantastic tailor assist me in feeling better and feeling what is probably the best it was going to be. But the point is that I wasn't in love with the look. I loved the dress, but just not exactly how it was looking on me. But like I said, I listened to this conversation with Jessi before, taking off for the weekend. And the one thing that I did take with me was the phrase, just try it. Simple, right? Jessi talked about being afraid to wear shorts and a tank top because, what if someone sees your legs or something like that? And she says, what if you just tried it? We conquer fear through action. So I thought to myself, going into the weekend and all weekend long, what if you went into this and tried to be a person who wasn't unhappy with how she looked? Who was a person who just had a great time instead of worrying about what she looked like at all? What if you just tried to be a person who didn't let her body image ruin her fun time? And I won't lie, I had my moments. I had my down moments, the moments where trying to be this person felt like the most challenging thing on the planet. And truthfully, I think my efforts in doing this combined with, this being a big family wedding and having my kids in the wedding and traveling and all of it, it came to a head at one point shortly after I got dressed and I just completely melted down. But overall, It was much easier and more enjoyable trying to be this person than I thought it would be. The idea of trying makes it feel doable. And although it didn't work 150% of the time, I mean, what does? So all in all, I did feel much better about my appearance than I expected to, and I'll take it. The other phrase that comes to me is something that Jessi said as far as acceptance being an alignment with reality. I really like that one. I'm still sitting with it. So as usual, I don't have a pretty bow to put around this body image issue, but I'm definitely in what Jessi calls the messy middle. I'm taking small steps forward, a couple of stumbles back, and I'm not where I want to be, but I know I'm not stuck where I was. Whatever that means. It makes sense, but does it? I don't know. All right, Jessi, you are awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation, for making the time, for coaching me, and just being an all-around solid human being. I have linked all of the places where you, listening, can find her work. You can learn more about her and even work with her in the show notes. So thank you for listening. I will catch you next time, as always. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.